May God save us from false religion.
What makes a religion false? If any religion is right, then maybe they all have to be right. Maybe God doesn't care how you say your prayers, just as long as you say them.
What if there's no God at all?
Is that what you believe?
I believe in saving lives. Without life, the question is meaningless.
But life has to be more than just a pulse beat. What we hold sacred gives our lives meaning.
A forbidden operation. Who asked you to play God? May save a child, but unleash a holy war.
If he touches Sean, I will kill him.
On the next Babylon 5.
You have transmissions holding.
Patch incoming signal. Full audio and video decode.
Purple files accessed.
What you are about to see has never been shown to anyone outside the Great Council.
Hello, everyone out there in podcast land. Welcome to the 24th top-ranked TV reviews podcast in Germany. But this is Grey 17, a Babylon 5 podcast, a part of the Front Row Network, and a part of NPR Illinois Community Voices. I am Scott, and with me, as always, is
Emily,
Blake,
Jessi,
Mike,
Andrew,
Kevin,
and I'm Justin,
and Nicole.
And we are going to be talking about Believers. But before I get started with Believers, I want to be serious for a moment and say that this episode is going to be a heavier episode because Believers, if you've watched it, is a heavier episode which talks about religion and the care for children. So if you are somebody who doesn't feel comfortable listening to that, we completely understand. We will be back next week with a much more interesting episode about terrorists, survivors. So it's going to be great, but just a fair warning on that. And for those of you who just joined us, I probably should tell you, we are a group of newbies and long-term fans who are watching Babylon 5 from the beginning. And then we will, halfway through this episode, jettison out the newbies so we can start talking spoilers about the entire show and what comes after Believers. So if you watched the show before, you can stay with us throughout the entire thing. If you are new to the show, then you can drop off when our newbies drop off.
Scott managed to piss off the creator of Babylon 5 and has been hate tweeted by GAMS for one of his opinions, telling him victory, you're fucking wrong. So
can we discuss this? Can we discuss this now?
Okay, so we were having a conversation about TKO, which you guys have not seen yet. But without spoilers, I will say TKO has, much like we said, subplot B and subplot A don't align much in this episode. Wait for TKO. The whole idea is those two subplots really don't align. Okay, and I'll leave it at that. So I said, I think this was probably because JMS, as a showrunner, is still trying to get his legs underneath him and trying to figure out how to determine if or not determine, but how to get everything he wants to do universe building in this first season. So he's just putting stuff together, even if it doesn't make sense. And he responded, the great maker himself responded saying, or maybe somebody else just wrote that episode. But I would have to say, and JMS has said this in other tweets, the showrunner has final decision-making power. So at the end of the day, I feel that I'm right and JMS is wrong, but I'm not going to tell him that. And I don't think he's listening, so it's okay.
Stay tuned for JMS's next hate tweet towards Scott.
Yes. So let's go ahead and get into our first impressions on Believers. And we'll go to Emily first.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So I'll start with, I liked Ivanova getting all saucy about wanting to take out the fighter jets. And as for the A plot, I knew it was going to be rough as soon as I saw the kid lying in the hospital bed and the title of the episode. But I'll more of that opinion for later because that's just the nice first impressions.
I like the first impression. That's excellent. Blake, what do you got?
You know, I'm going to say, and you've touched on this, Scott, several times, but reading Straczynski's book, Becoming Superman, and looking at his background, he actually spent time living in a religious cult-like community.
And he calls it a cult. So it's not like we're saying
he calls it a cult. I'm pulling words from his book, so that's not me adding in. But I think this is the start of what you see with this episode, pulling pieces from his own life and experience as he crafts some of these stories and some of this narrative, and looking how that plays into this episode now that I've read the book and watching this again, because this wasn't one of my favorite episodes for many reasons, but I think it's aged better as far as showing the direction he went with the show, and also with the type of storylines he wasn't afraid to tackle. I mean, we've all mentioned a certain other sci-fi franchise, and this never would have happened there. The story never would have resolved this way. This was him again making a statement of this was not the same type of sci-fi that had been around. And
you mentioned another sci-fi show, which obviously is Star Trek. But the writer of this episode was David Gerrold. Does anyone who's a Star Trek nerd know what David Gerrold wrote in Star Trek original series? I was the Trials and Tribulations, but that's a DS9 episode. The Trouble with Tribbles. So this is the Tribbles guy writing this episode. And then he came back for Star Trek the Animated Series and wrote a Tribbles episode for Star Trek the Animated Series. So this is the Tribbles guy talking about child death.
And knows what he's good at.
But I think it is fascinating, though, that JMS went out and got a Star Trek writer to write the We Are Not Star Trek episode. So, yeah. Jessi, what do you got?
This episode was a mindfuck. Just watching it and beginning to watch it, and I think it was Emily that said, you knew that it was going to be heavy when you saw the kid lying in bed. I did not realize how relevant, I guess, this show is. I mean, I should know by now because we're almost, we're hopefully more than halfway through the first season. And he's writing about things again that were prevalent at that time, that are still prevalent at this time. And it was just a really deep episode. I will say, side note, it's the first episode that when I saw Ivanova, I smiled. So you're all welcome. Here we are. I've fully accepted, and I find myself being very glad to see her on the screen. So I stand corrected.
In writing right now. So you are pro Ivanova now. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
Thank you for the pregnant pause. We appreciate it. and you are, this is 3 episodes in a row where you actually liked the episode?
Well, okay. If you can say you liked the episode, sure.
Are you happy you watched the episode?
I was intrigued by said episode. It made me uncomfortable, like a lot of the other episodes have, but it is what it is. You can't really be happy when a kid dies. So
okay, let's go to Mike.
God damn. The first dialogue in the episode is a child's voice saying, "Am I gonna die?" And I haven't felt this good after watching something since I watched the movie Up, which was like, "Hey kids, you're mortal." Yeah, man, there's no talking dog in this one either. It was just sad. That said, it was a very good episode. I don't know what the B plot was about or what it was even doing in this episode, because it made no sense considering the ultra heaviness of plot A. But
I'm going to disagree with you, sir, on that. I think it actually ties together really well, because you have 2 command staff of Babylon 5 disobeying orders. Obviously, Franklin's been told, do not do the surgery. Ivanova has been told, do not leave the convoy. Ivanova leaves the convoy, takes a risk, and we don't see what happens, but it looks like the risk she took paid off. And then at the very end of the episode, we see the kid. And by the way, that is the docking ship that she protected from the raiders. The kid comes off and is greeted by his parents. And that's why Garibaldi says sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't.
That's fair. I guess it's not lost on me. It's just mostly that the plots were so, I guess that's why you call them plot A and plot B, but it felt so unbalanced that you're right. I'll rescind my statement that the B plot didn't belong there, but I didn't like the way that it was necessarily executed and tied together. I totally get the end scene and how it was kind of poignant after what had happened. But anyway, that said, overall, it's obviously not a feel-good episode. It's a feel-bad episode. But the fact that it makes you feel bad makes it a good episode because it's relevant and it's a thinker, and that's, what we're here for.
Andrew, what do you got?
I liked the episode, but I'm in agreement with everyone else that it's not a fun watch. My final note here in my notes for the episode is just, what the fuck is that ending? Yeah, that's all I got.
Kevin, go ahead.
Really liked seeing Trisha O'Neill in this episode, even though it's a very downer episode. I remember hating this one a lot more than I felt this time seeing it. This is not a good episode for Dr. Franklin in a lot of different ways. He really comes off as a cocky asshole in this episode, and so does his other doctor. But man, they really hit on a lot of stuff without showing really any cultural relativism at all, which you would think you would need to have that particular skill set on a space station full of aliens. But there you go. They don't seem to have, or at least Franklin and the medical staff doesn't seem to have any. This is a tough episode, but it really does show how the clash of cultures can be really difficult.
Justin, what do you got?
This is probably the first episode that I've yelled obscenities at my television, to be honest. It all started with a couple actor misidentifications. I really thought at the beginning that the dad was Meatloaf. And then I thought that the actor who played Sean was the same kid who played Alexander in Next Generation.
I did
sadly,
too.
Sadly, I was wrong on both counts. But yeah, this is, it's a rough one, man. I don't have kids, but it's still a really gut puncher. And it's a tale that's old as time. And how many times throughout the history of humanity have we had this debate? Have we had this discussion? It pops up in the news every so often. We've had major court cases about it. Every TV show's covered it in one way or another. So it's always something that's still at kind of the forefront, the separation between religion and medical science. I love Ivanova in this. I see now why a lot of people really like her. I love to see her getting sassy. I was laughing out loud at the clips about her kind of feeling like the wife stuck in the kitchen. I'm just going to sit here and knit me a sweater or something like that, and I really like kind of seeing her in that kind of role and seeing her more animated, and seeing her more involved. But yeah, this episode sucks for, a lot of reasons, but yeah, I don't regret watching it. It's definitely a very poignant episode, and I'll kind of leave it at that.
Nicole.
So I can see why Kevin hated it for so long. So I do feel like this episode was really sad, and it was really hard, and it was very heavy, but I also feel like it was really impactful too. And the crazy thing to me is, which has already been mentioned, is how it's these things that the show from all these years ago, these themes and these problems and all these things that they discuss and go through are still relevant today. It's crazy, how it's still a debate. There's still people who reject medical things because of religion and things like that. This is still something that happens. So it's really interesting to me and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Just powerful, how this show from so long ago can be so relevant today, but also just the gamut of emotions that you feel throughout the episode. I feel like that's really important too when you're watching something. If it makes you feel something, I feel like that is how you recognize it's a good show. So as sad and depressing and awful as it was still so good because it was it still punched you in the gut in a good way and just had that powerful feeling. Also, I really loved how Ivanova just gave the business to Sinclair. She was let me go knit, like Justin was saying. She just let him have it. And then he's like, do you want to go out and do that? She goes, well, if you insist, So I really like that. But I think the juxtaposition at the end, too, about when Garibaldi, I forgot who had mentioned that, said, some things work out, some things don't. If the kid coming back, I do think that, was kind of like a one more shove, one more stab at you, it was like, oh, you think you're okay now? Let me jab at you one more time with that little kid in the family. So, and again, I don't have kids, but I can imagine being a parent. This is probably a hard to digest episode.
Before we dive into the episode, I want to kind of point out too, a couple of us have mentioned, this is an interesting episode that was able to air in 1994 because one, it's not hard sci-fi. There's not much going on aside from, pew pew in space a little bit, but also the fact that you have this hard conversation about religious rights and medical and science rights and everything else. So JMS pointed out in the Usenet back in the 90s that before the episode even aired, he had this to say. By the way, here's something interesting. An outline got turned in this week for an episode which I won't identify just now. Came in from one of our writers based on the assigned premise. It's something you'll have never done on any sci-fi TV series, and I don't think it's ever been done on TV overall. A very daring little story. Word finally came back from our liaison with PTEN. Number one, this is a quote from the liaison PTEN. Number one, this is absolutely against the demographics of the show. Number two, no studio or network executive in his right mind would ever approve this story in a million years. Number three, it's a hell of a story. I love it. Let's do it. So it is nice that the studio actually backed them up on this. I will bash the studio a lot, more so in season 1 than I do any other time, except for season 5, which we'll get there when we get there. But this time, the studio let them do it, and I'm really impressed by that as well, too. So let's go ahead and, because it's a minor point, is there any more conversations on the B plot before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this episode? Does anyone else want to say anything about Ivanova and what she's doing? Again, Nicole and everybody else, I do agree with you. I'm kind of upset that John is not here this week. John, by the way, has been kicked out of the country and is touring Europe for a few weeks, so that's why he's not here. But I think this is an episode where he could probably latch onto Ivanova as well, too, because even though she doesn't get much in terms of lines, the lines she gets ingratiates her more to us than I think anything has happened so far in the show, aside from maybe when she's talking to her dad in that one episode. Kevin, what do you got?
I'm just glad she got to do something in this show and really showed why she is the second in command of the station instead of just being a hood ornament, because she definitely is a very capable officer. And I'm glad that they finally, in the 10th or 11th or whatever number of the episode this is, finally showed that.
This is episode 10.
10.
But it is production episode 5. So we're actually going back in time production-wise. This one was made fairly early on. It just didn't air for a while. Emily.
I want to know what she actually did, because she left the group, took on the Raiders, and what? Sure,
you know what?
Got damaged. But I want to know what she actually did. How did she do it? I feel like there's a lot there.
Let's take a little stroll into Usenet, because people were asking JMS the same thing back in the 90s, and he answered. So let me find that, because I actually have it pulled up, and now I got to find. Okay, so he said, what happened to Ivanova when she encountered the Raiders? ? She got away by long distance firing as she retreated as fast as she could, taking shots as she went. It wouldn't look really exciting in the long run, so we didn't shoot it. So she went pew pew and ran.
I actually thought in that last scene that they showed the shuttle docking, and I actually thought she was getting off the shuttle. Like they had to pick her up.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, because we'll learn actually in the next episode that there are Cobra Bays where the Star Furies come out. And this is not a spoiler, because it's really going to come up in the next episode. So the Star Furies that they're flying do not come in the same place as the main ship. So I think they just did that to kind of make the plot move quick, because she definitely would not be arriving from that gate. Nicole, what do you got?
I was going to ask what happened to the ship, because I know it was pretty damaged, but I also thought it was really cool to see her flying and being in combat and just doing something totally different, because she's usually at the helm of the ship. And, it was nice to see her outside of that doing something different, kind of showing off what she is capable of in a way. I thought it was really cool that they finally kind of showed that and let us see a little different side of her.
It's kind of interesting. We talk about this space station being huge. It's 250,000 people roughly. But there seems to be only 3 people in the command staff that can lead a squadron of fighters. We know Garibaldi can, we know Sinclair can, and now we know Ivanova can. And it's basically said in this episode that only those 3 are rated high enough to be commanders of a squadron. So I think that's an interesting thing that probably will come up again down the road. Blake, what do you got?
I mean, on the B plot of this one, it is good to see Ivanova getting to do something, but I still kind of go back to what Mike said earlier about it seems a little out of place in this episode, and I think that might be a byproduct of the production order that, you know, they did this kind of 5, and it feels like they threw the Raider plot in as a lack of a better way to know how to get there as a standalone episode. And so it does feel disjointed from the rest of the episode as far as some of the other B plots integrate nicely as a background piece, whereas this one really sort of doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they put the B plot in there to try to break up the heaviness is kind of one thought I had.
Yeah, and I definitely get that. And I think that they did try to break up the heaviness with the episode. I just think they were a little heavy-handed on the B plot with this one about it not fitting. I mean, some of the other episodes we've seen with B plots, the B plot actually does weave better into the episode itself than what this one did. This one was really felt like, you know, okay, A, we have this concept we need to introduce, and B, we have some time to kill, so let's just throw it in there rather than a thought out, like written in B plot to the episode as a whole. And it was kind of that in part with Garibaldi saying, oh, here, I'll fill you in, was kind of the bridge to like, oh yeah, let me catch you up on everything that's just happened that's completely unrelated. So for me, it just feels disjointed between the A and B plot with this one.
Yeah, I think that really sums up my feelings about it, probably better than what I said earlier. I was just going to point out, I guess I'm the odd man out on this one, because while I've liked Susan Ivanova as a character and everything, I actually did not care for her dialogue and her little sassy moment in the beginning. It felt something that's bothering me, especially in this episode, and I'll just put it out there, is I feel like all of the command officers are very disrespectful to Sinclair. Like, I get that they're kind of like, he hand recruited these people and brought them in because they're kind of his friends and his respected colleagues, and they have maybe a slightly less than professional relationship with one another, but like the way Ivanova kind of like talked to him in front of, I'm assuming there were other people on the bridge of Babylon 5 at that time, and then the way that the doctor interacted with them, I was just like dang, these people walk all over Sinclair. It really kind of bugged me.
I have to say, after being a manager of someone that's also a friend of mine, this is exactly what it's like.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, I've been a director of a staff for quite a while now, and yeah, I think it depends on the leader too. If you allow for just kind of an open communication like that, then that's what you're going to get. And I personally prefer to be in an office like that or a command and control center like that than be in the hardcore of them. I think it is interesting though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I don't think that it was an accurate portrayal, but I also think that this is like a gigantic space station that's a government effort, and they're in the military and not like managing an Office Max. So
I want to drive the forklift today. Come on, it's my turn. I will say though, and Mike, you know this because you've watched the show, we will get more military type personnel down the road who will be more by the book. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. So I think we will definitely see that more too. Justin,
I honestly just think it's more of Sinclair's management style. And it's kind of pretty similar to my own. Like, I want my people to be able to be open and honest with me. And I really think that's just how he prefers to run things. Like, he trusts those people to be 100% open and honest with them at all times. So then sometimes, yeah, maybe they will overstep that line a little bit from time to time. But I honestly think, just from what I understand of Sinclair, I think he'd rather have those moments more than have strict military discipline and protocol.
Jessi, what do you got?
I didn't see anything wrong with it. I'm sure that's shocking to everybody on this podcast, but I saw a very frustrated woman, a woman who probably is overlooked for some of these missions, because you see the guys run in and she's just kind of left standing there most of the time. So, you know, for somebody that's capable and has the ability and is willing to do so, it's probably frustrating for her to have been like, oh yeah, well go get the other guy to do it. So I liked, and I didn't think she was disrespectful about it. She was a little passive aggressive. But I mean, as somebody who can do that with the best of them. I don't, sometimes it's effective. So
we've been getting some reviews in, and first and foremost, if you're listening to this and you haven't reviewed us, and I know you haven't because only 2 people have, so chances are pretty good you haven't reviewed us. Please do. Either on Apple, Spotify, Audible, wherever you're listening to us, give us a review, even if it's just a 5-star, or if you want to give us less than 5-star, fine, I guess. If you want to be mean about it, go for it. But give us a review because it will definitely help us out. I mean, we're already number 24 in Germany, but we can do better, and your reviews will help us.
How does this go? If you give us anything less than 5s, my manager will not give me a gift card.
So let's read a review because we do have a couple. And if you put a review in and it's not really mean, well, actually, you know what? If it's mean, I'll probably still read it, and we'll have Jessi read your hate tweets as well too. But let's read some reviews that come in. So this one comes from Logo728. Cool idea, great execution. We didn't pay him off, believe it or not. So how do you make a cult sci-fi TV show from 25 years ago relevant and interesting to longtime fans and newbies alike? Have both as regulars on the podcast. Grade 17 makes the very clever move of introducing new people to one of the most important sci-fi television shows of the 90s, resulting in a whole new perspective on the show and its groundbreaking format. For viewers who grew up watching TV that was revolutionized by B5, only a few episodes in, the chemistry between the crew is already solid and keeps getting better. Certainly worth a listen. First off, thank you for saying that it was very clever because it was my idea. So I appreciate that it's clever.
So what are we talking about? What most influential sci-fi shows? Does no one remember Viper back in the 90s?
I loved Viper. It was great.
It was actually a great show. I loved it.
Show.
How
My
about
friends and I
Mantis?
talked about it every week.
Time Tracks.
Mantis.
Time Tracks was on BTN. It led into Babylon 5.
There
You
you go.
watch Time Tracks and then you watch Babylon 5. And then you watch
the briefly lived RoboCop series.
No, I wouldn't go that far. The Canadian one or the US one? The Canadian
The
one's
US
good.
one.
Oh,
I never watched the Canadian one.
But then after you watched Time Tracks and Babylon 5, you stayed on for Kung Fu, The Legend Continues.
Legend
with David
Returned,
Carradine. No, The Legend Continues. I was right. Wipe my ass. It's The Legend Continues. And it was with David Carradine and his son, which actually I think it was his son because nepotism, wow.
It was his son, and then Highlander, the Highlander series.
That wasn't on PTN, but good job.
But
Stick with your Viper joke.
it was still a good one.
Does anyone remember
Viper-
Marker? Marker, yeah, with Gates McFadden.
I do not.
Oh,
No, I
that
do
was
not.
that was right as UPN because Babylon 5 was on UPN briefly. I'm pretty sure. Right
Babylon
Kevin's
5 was
always-
on every, yeah.
Okay.
But Kevin's always had an unhealthy crush on Gates McFadden, so that
Shut up.
doesn't surprise me.
Who hasn't?
Damn it!
I mean,
My secret's out.
She's coming back for Picard
But
season
honestly,
3.
but if there is a Canadian version of RoboCop, I feel like I have to go see it. I want to see him like in a red outfit and be like overly polite to people.
There's actually, it's a mini series and there's 3 of them. And I've only seen the first one, but it's actually relatively good.
Dead or alive, you're coming with me, don't you know?
It's actually,
Jesus. Hold on. While we're at it, did anybody watch? And maybe my point in time here is wrong, but The Invisible Man.
yes. Yeah.
That was a great show.
Yes.
I think now until I go rewatch it later tonight.
Jessi just went off video. She's done.
I was going to say, is Jessi sticking ice picks in her ears right now? Or like,
Nicole looks in pain too. She's like, oh, good. The nerd boys are talking.
I'm just wondering when you're going to bring up Sequest ESV.
Thank you.
The first episode, the first season of Sequest is, we now say Orville is Star Trek. When Sequest came out, Sequest was Star Trek in the ocean. Yeah.
Yeah,
and then they made
one good. Season 2, season 3, what the fuck?
Well, you know what? Season 3 has Michael Ironside, so I give it bonus
it
points
counts
for
for
that.
a lot.
Is that the guy who became?
No, that's
Jason Ironheart.
That's Jason
Sorry.
Ironheart.
Sorry, close.
Michael Ironside is the character actor who's been in every movie you saw in the 80s and you didn't know it was him.
he became all over.
I don't know. I think the dad in this episode of Babylon 5 might be the guy that you've seen in something somewhere at some time.
Yeah. Well, Trisha O'Neill is in tons of stuff, not just Star Trek either. Lots.
She was a captain of the Enterprise C.
Yep,
Captain Garrett.
Well, and she was on DS9 once, maybe twice.
Which, by the way,
for Titanic,
everyone's like Captain Janeway is the first female captain. You didn't watch yesterday's Enterprise.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, we kind of glossed over it at this point, but I thought the actress that played I don't know if it's Dr. Franklin's nurse or fellow doctor.
She's
I thought
she's
she
a
was
fellow
actually
fellow doctor.
I thought she was
Hernandez.
great in this episode.
Yeah, I will. Thank you for bringing that up, and I'm sure we'll talk about her a little bit more too. But what you have is you have several med bays and med labs across the station because this is a huge station. So Franklin is the chief doctor, but there are other doctors around the station, and sometimes they come in for consults with Franklin, and that's who that is. And we will see her again, not a spoiler, but she is going to be a semi-recurring character from now on.
Cool, yeah, because I like her.
Yes, she comes back.
According to IMDb, she was only in this one episode.
Without spoiling
Unless her name
things,
changes.
maybe it's a different actress, but she's playing the same character, and I can't say more because it's actually a relatively long arc of the show when she shows up, and we'll talk
Fair
about
enough.
Beyond the Rim.
Well, I'll throw this out there too. The actor that played the child in this episode also has quite a few IMDb credits leading up till even this.
And
year.
he's still active. Yeah, he's still an active actor.
Well, he was very good in this episode. He did a really good
Jonathan
job.
C. Kaplan.
There's so many child actors who
Hats
would
off to you,
love
sir.
this. Yeah. Thank you for making me cry, you jackass. Okay, let's dive in to the A plot with Sean and the worst parents ever. Go ahead. Who wants to talk about them first?
Well, were they the worst parents ever?
I know. I dangled that out there just for fun. This is the conversation we're going to have.
I mean, anyone who mistakes them for not loving their son in this episode is completely missing the point.
Completely agree. And I think they show you that too. I mean, they go out of their way to save their son's soul, quote unquote, by going to everyone, including Kosh. Who talks to Kosh?
Yeah.
They go to him and they beg for his help. And by the way,
But Kosh's response was awesome.
That's one of my favorite quotes from Kosh. I've used it many times. And it also it's revealing too, because we talked about this in the episode that Dr. Kyle opened the door to this when he operated on Kosh without his permission. And that's why Kosh said, the avalanche has already started. It's too late for the pebbles to vote. Kosh knows Kyle operated on him and knows that it opened something up, literally and metaphorically. Nicole, what do you got?
I was just going to say, that's interesting what you said about Kosh, because, yeah, they literally did. When they asked him, oh, how would you feel if it was you? He basically had the same thing happen to him. He was operated on, regardless, or saved or whatever. But I was going to say, like, the whole, it's like, that they love him, but, like, they're doing what they feel in their heart is right. But Franklin has an oath to save people. So the clash between them, too, it was there. You weren't telling each other anything, they were just never going to agree. And then I thought, when they went to all the different ambassadors and they even went to Sinclair before, they thought that, Franklin did. And they, made the rounds asking for help. I was really surprised that Sinclair agreed not to allow Franklin to do the surgery. To be honest, I thought he was going to give in and tell him to do it. But I was really shocked that he didn't. And one of the things that I don't want to go too far ahead, but at the end when they rejected him, that just like broke my heart, that part right there. And we can get into the end a little bit more later, but it was like a emotional roller coaster watching that, because it was like you want to choke one, but then you want to choke the other because, like the little boy should live, but you can see both sides. It was just really, like Jessi said, I think it was a mind fuck for sure.
Mike, I did a little bit of IMDbing, and it's a different actor and a different character. A female doctor who does the exact same thing shows up again. Basically, I think they just switched out the actors, which, happens in the show. Emily.
I thought it was interesting when the mother was trying to convince Delin to intervene and had the audacity of saying, so your beliefs won't let you intervene? Like, really? Really? Your beliefs won't let you have medical intervention to save your son's life, and you're going to get salty with her about this? Yeah, I was very frustrated by that. Like, do not see the absurdity of it, of the accusation.
I thought it was fascinating how each one of the ambassadors handled it. We already talked about Kosh. He's just like, it's already done. You can't stop it. Jakar is like, I don't even know who the heck you are, and you do nothing for me, so whatever. Londo wanted some kickback. He's like, I'll do it for you, but you got to pay me.
Definitely feel like the production order mattered here.
Yes, I agree. Yes, because especially with Jakar, right?
I mean, they made Jakar's response the most dickheaded response possible. They made Londo's the same, but slightly softer, I guess, in a way, because he's charming. Delenn was like, I felt very meant to be like, I'm sorry, honey. I wish I could help you, but I can't.
Bless your heart. Bless your heart.
And Kosh was like, you just got Koshed. But
wasn't Delenn's kind of the whole thoughts and prayers response on Facebook? You always say,
it was, and I completely agree with Emily and the like. How dare you? How like it was like thrown right back in her face. Like the very thing I'm asking you to do, you're now mad at me about. Kind of the pot calling the kettle black.
I thought it almost sounded like a form of Star Trek's Prime Directive a little bit. It's like we can't interfere. That's how I took it.
Isn't it ironic that, and I completely agree with you, Kevin, but isn't it ironic that we're talking about the species that literally almost wiped the Earth off the face of the universe? Because we just saw that a few weeks ago. But now they're like, we don't interfere unless you fire at us. Then we definitely interfere.
No, it was not interfering about matters of the soul, like spiritual matters. It had nothing to do with like, annihilating a whole race, because that might be a whole different segment of their belief system.
You're completely right on that, Emily. And actually, JMS in the Usenet back in the day said that Delenn is actually referring to the Soul Hunters in some way in this as well too. It's the same kind of thing. Justin, what do you got?
I mean, I guess this is something I have struggled with personally. Thinking about it, and this just brings back a lot of the thoughts I've had about this issue one way or another. Does the state have the right to intervene with the wishes of a parent? And under what circumstances do we allow it? You can even throw, doctor-assisted suicide. Like a lot of the state versus medical arguments really, that just rechurned all of this in my head. So it's like sometimes I sympathize. Honestly, there are times I've sympathized with the parents in this episode. Like they have their own personal religious beliefs, and especially if you see the way that they reacted after the surgery, treating him like they even called him a demon, because their religious beliefs teach them that if you puncture the body, the soul leaks out and you're no longer a holy being. So I don't know. I really struggle with it. And it's, unfortunately, this episode and future encounters with this issue isn't going to do much to probably fix it. And I guess going along with one of my other favorite quotes is, sometimes doing the right thing doesn't change anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, what did we learn from this episode? Not really anything more than we've learned from the other iterations. And I think it's actually, if this was the first time it was ever done on TV, what a iconic influence, because now every medical show ever has done it. I mean, you've seen it in so many other iterations throughout other television shows, that if this was actually the first time that they ever did this, it's well done to JMS and the B5 crew. I mean, it was very risky.
And again, I've scoured the Usenets for this one too, this little plum. JMS actually got called out saying, actually, this is the kind of the same plot as City on the Edge of Forever. I'm like, well, kinda. A little bit. Somebody has to die. But Andrew, go ahead.
One thing I wanted to point out was part of when Dr. Franklin is trying to take, and he gives him that little ball of goo or whatever he calls it, and tells him no, it's an egg. I need you to take care of it because I'll be busy taking care of you. And then Sean reveals later, hey, he gave me this pile of goo. And, he told me it was an egg, but I'm pretty sure this is just a pile of goo. That, I kind of like that little small bit, because it shows that these guys aren't whatever religion they believe in, they're not completely blinded by it. They're aware of the whole placebo effect.
Jessi.
So I think this just comes to show that okay. Let's start with the show where they said, they start with the show that says, they said something about whose belief is right? All these people believe different things and who's right. But it also shows how dangerous religion can be. And as somebody who identifies as a Christian, taking out taking out my personal beliefs, organized religion can be absolutely deadly to the wrong and most unfortunate people. And I'll tell you, Sinclair had some extreme neglect here, because the dad of the child straight up looked at him and said, if that doctor does that surgery, I'm going to kill him. So what do? They let the kid go with dad after dad has already said, if this surgery is completed, I'm going to kill him. Awesome. So also, third and final point, I think, is you use your religion to murder somebody. What does your religion say about murder? Like, I'm confused as to where your religion draws the lines, and what religion. I'm sure there's many out there, so let's stop there. But, you know, in this religion, doing a surgery to save your only son's life is an abomination, but murdering your son and calling it well, that wasn't my son. That was absolutely your son, sir. And, you know, I don't care who we're talking about, whose belief is right. We have a state system who intervenes in parents' decisions all the time. Almost every state in the country, in our country, does this. Department of Child Services will walk in and straight up take a kid if the parents aren't doing what they're supposed to in the state's eyes. And medical neglect is one of the things that will get a child removed from a home. So it was a hard episode for me to watch because there was a lot of neglect on so many different levels.
Jessi, it's interesting that you say the dad said he was going to kill Sean. I read that as the dad was going to kill Franklin.
So I did.
Franklin operates on my kid, I will kill the doctor.
I thought too.
So when I heard it, I was like, oh, he's going to kill the doctor. So when they're like, we would like to talk to the doctor, I'm like, this is it. They're going to murder him. And then they didn't. They didn't even get mad at him. They were like, listen, you did it? Okay, cool. We're going to kill our kid. Like, please let us take him so we can take him back in this other room and murder him in some weird ritual. Like that is how it came full circle for me, because I kind of read it the same way at first too. But I mean, I guess hindsight's 2020. I guess I can look back and say, yeah, sure. Okay. He already told. But to me, telling Sinclair, if he does this, I'm going to murder him. I guess you got to be cautious on every level, I would think.
It's interesting too. You mentioned how the dad was more reserved after that. I do like that the world building is not just about their religion being, we protect the soul and everything else, but it's very clear that this is a culture that men are supposed to be stoic. And we've seen several times in this episode, the mother speaks for the father. Mm-hmm. And then even at the ritual death, the father is being fairly stoic and the mother is speaking to Franklin and everything else. So it's interesting that they built up the culture in a couple different ways here. Blake, what do you got?
So I'm going to touch real quick on something Jessi made the comment about with the religion and the killing. I mean, we've seen within multiple religions the concept of honor killings or other practices that within the religious code are allowable, even on religions that we have now. But the one thing is, this episode's almost 30 years old, and we still see these arguments over religious freedoms and whose beliefs are right or wrong. And we see it even outside of medicine and medical care with things like assisted suicide or what medical treatments people will get in accordance with their faith. There's the huge argument right now over schools and education and what is being taught in classrooms that represents a violation or goes against people's belief and parental rights to what their children should be exposed to in classrooms, and how we're seeing that manifest itself. So watching this episode that's nearly 30 years old delve into these concepts of religion and whose beliefs are right or wrong. And I think that's even one of the little monologue-y moments that Sinclair had was, who's to say which belief is right and which one's wrong? And, how do we choose that? And, we see that on Earth right now, let alone when you look at, a galaxy full of differing belief systems and religions and processes. And we see how that plays out in this case in a medical scenario with MedLab and with Franklin making these decisions. And he flat out says, people come to me and want us to be gods. If I'm going to be responsible for that, I claim the authority to do whatever the hell I want, basically, to save patients' lives. And this time, it comes back around when the parents, and again, we had this comment earlier on with, I think it was the episode with Marshall Teague and the real quick moment where they know nothing about the species. And then all of a sudden Franklin's giving this, rundown of their entire history, like 5 seconds later. we see that again at the end of this one. Nobody knows anything about this culture. No one knows anything. And then just right at the end, here comes the report that they did from the research team. So I kind of feel like they had that little exposition moment at the end where there was that aha of, oh, crap, there's the Great Journey and there's this robe thing. And that, Franklin then figures out that, oh, they're going to kill this kid in accordance with religion to make good what he did in their eyes. So, it's just kind of interesting how they went with that narrative piece again. But overall, with religion and seeing it, this episode still is relevant now as it was then. And you look at the different beliefs. I mean, we've seen, especially in a post 9/11 world, those of us that have seen the reaction to even people of the Muslim faith within the United States and the backlash to even where they've wanted to build mosques to their religious beliefs with communities pushing back on that. So it's just been an interesting watching this now versus when it was in 94.
Emily, go ahead.
Well, one of the things this episode made me think is that whether or not a deity or multiple deities exist, we create the religion, we create the rituals, we create interpretations, we create these belief systems. And it really makes me question us as a species that we create these systems that can be so harmful. And then how we define that harm. Because to these parents, him losing his soul was a greater harm than him ceasing to exist, And it also made me wonder if he fell down and scraped his knee, would they have to kill him too? If there was would his soul escape through the scraped knee?
You were
like that. Like we create these elaborate systems that don't really always have coherency to them.
You are basically channeling the internet of 1994 because that question came up too. So if they scratch their arm or bruise their knee, are they going to, lose their soul and become a zombie? JMS did say, and of course it wasn't in the show, so I agree with you. In the show, it's kind of shaky. He said it's the chest cavity. When you open the chest cavity, you let the soul out. But that wasn't said in the show, so I thought the same thing. So How many kids fall off their bikes on this planet and immediately get killed off because they're zombies?
Well, now I feel a little bit better, but you know what I mean. Like we create elaborate systems and then redefine harm based on whatever system we've chosen to follow.
Nicole, what do you got?
I was going to say, I thought it was kind of interesting of all the different religious comparisons that were made and the different quotes, for example. Well, Sinclair comparing himself to Pontius Pilate. I don't know if you guys caught that reference. Mm-hmm. I was like, yo, all right, he's going to go there. And then he was saying about, what we hold sacred gives our lives meanings, not necessarily, our beliefs or whatever. And then when Franklin was like, I'm waiting for an apology, and he's like, yeah, you have to check the temperature in hell first. I thought that was so it was kind of interesting because I felt like Sinclair has his own faith and there was a lot of references and comparisons to traditional and current faith that maybe we're more used to as opposed to this alien faith or belief system that they have. So that was just kind of an observation that I found there was several just references and things towards common day religion that I thought were kind of interesting and almost a little inappropriate.
Kevin,
who was it that said that this was a good episode for Dr. Hernandez, the colleague of Dr. Franklin? Because I don't understand that viewpoint. I understand that she was loyal at the end, which I certainly appreciate, but I mean, she was almost, antagonizing the parents at the beginning of the episode, by, what kind of crappy religion do you follow? And it's well, that's certainly not going to work. So I guess I super don't understand that.
I don't think anyone said it was it looked good for her, but I think it was good to have that character in there in the mix.
Yeah, I thought she was a great actress in this. I thought
I see. Okay.
She played the character very well.
Oh, okay. I get it. I thought this was a really bad episode for Franklin. I mean, yes, in the middle of the episode, you see his enormous compassion and dedication, but at the beginning, he just completely steps on, the mom asking him not to be, throwing their religion kind of in their own face. And then by the end, of course, he's just completely out of line for multiple reasons and being cocky about it. But I think that's one of the reasons why I don't remember every detail of these episodes that I've seen before, but I think that's probably the reason why I super don't like this episode, because Franklin is such an ass in this episode.
Yeah, he has like a real god complex at times in this one, and it's
which is not unlike a lot of surgeons. So I get that that's fairly accurate, but it's still you hope that he's better than that. Maybe he'll grow from this, in the his character will grow from this. Maybe they won't. I won't say, but.
We will say as soon as the newbies leave, because we're definitely going to talk about Franklin a little bit in Beyond the Rim. Absolutely going to talk about it. Just Jessi, go ahead.
We all choose a hill to die on at one point in our career or another. And Dr. Franklin did exactly what he was hired and took an oath to do. I have a question. By a show of hands, as a doctor, who thinks they would have, and you can cut this out, Scott. This is just for my
I'm already
personal
saying,
opinion.
you're about to ready ask for a show of hands on a podcast.
Right. And this is just a personal belief, but as a show of hands, as the doctor, who thinks they would have done that surgery?
Yeah. As a doctor? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, is that's what he was hired to do. He's hired to save people. And he took an oath, probably to do no harm and do what's right for every patient. And so regardless of religious beliefs, he didn't have to me, it looked like he didn't have a choice. He was just gonna, I don't know if I see it as a God complex, but I see it as his job. And he chose that hill to die on, and he died. You know what I mean? Like, he died on it. He said, "I'm ready to give my resignation whenever you want it." So yeah. I think he did exactly what they hired him to do.
But I know, Jessi, like you had mentioned earlier, medical neglect, and that's even like, especially in a state like mine, that's a very gray area.
Sure.
And that's, and again, like, it's something that I kind of like struggle with, even with myself, about then where does the parental rights come in? And it's never an easy conversation to have. So I honestly hope I never have to have that
conversation. I just think that with medical neglect, I don't think that one of the gray areas, I think one of the not gray areas of medical neglect is not providing life-saving measures. So, I mean, it's, you know what I mean? If there is something that a doctor can do, to give an example, I saw a case of a kid that had some kind of brain swelling when it was born, and the doctor gave mom a list of appointments that she had to go to, and she missed the first 2 or 3 of them. And so they went and they took her kid from her, because here's the thing, is the doctor told her, if you don't bring this child to these appointments, your child can die. And she chose not to bring the kid to the appointments, and they went and took the baby until she can get back on a plan to be able to give the child the appointments that it needs. So it's like, I feel like, yes, there are a lot of gray areas, especially in the child protection realm. Like, look, that's a job that I don't think I could ever do. But there are black and white areas. There are a lot of gray areas, but I think one of those areas that it's not is if you don't give your child the treatment that it needs to live. That's one of those areas that you kind of tie their hands.
I will agree with you that if I was Franklin, I would have done the surgery personally. However, I will say that Franklin has a God complex, and it's not just he's following his oath. And we see that with the steak dinner. I think that was put in there to point out right there that he is not just doing this because he thinks he should. He's doing it because he thinks he can. He thinks he will get away with it.
What
and
are you
that's
talking
why
about?
The betting of the steak dinner. When he flat out, when they say that he's going to get this done, and if he gets it done, the other doctor is going to buy him a steak.
Okay, I must have missed that part.
Yeah, it's a couple scenes, but so I think that is put in there flat out for that reason. He's not just being the good doctor; he is being an egotist, and he is saying, "I know what's best, and I will get this done, and no matter what happens, I will do it," which is a God complex. And whether you agree with him doing the surgery or not, he absolutely goes above and beyond what he should have done, just in the fact that he made it kind of nonchalant. Like, oh, this is just another day in the park, and I'm going to go ahead and do this.
I'm right. They'll see that I'm right.
Yeah, everyone will see I'm right, and I will get. And you know what? Going back to the B plot, Ivanova says the same thing. I'm right. I'm going to go ahead and break the rules and go on ahead. And she got lucky. He didn't. And that's the whole point of what Garibaldi says at the end. Sometimes we get lucky. Sometimes we don't.
Did he not get lucky, though? Because he saved the kid's life. So he did exactly.
Not at the end.
But that's not his. That had nothing to do with him.
The kid still died.
That was all the parents.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing, Jessi. I'm sorry for stepping on you there. I apologize. But here's the thing. The difference is the kid's last few moments of his life were horrendous. Not only did he die, he died with his parents scared of him. So you're a kid. I'm guessing he's like 13, 14 years old at the most. And not only are you dying, but at the very end, when you need comfort the most, you are shunned and alienated by the only people who you know. That is a terrible way to die. So I don't think Franklin got I think it would have been better off, again, hindsight being 2020, I think it would have been better off to let him die in comfort with his family than to let him be murdered by his family.
Especially when the child himself agreed with the religion.
Sure. But you didn't know that was going to happen. So we're all looking at a hindsight 2020 situation. Sinclair didn't have that knowledge, or I'm sorry, Dr.
Franklin
didn't have that knowledge that was going to happen. So yes, hindsight being, sure, let the kid die, right? The kid's going to die anyway. Let him die in peace and not in this terrible, excruciating pain and emotional discomfort. But Franklin didn't have that knowledge. Sinclair had that knowledge, but Sinclair didn't know he had that knowledge. So,
see, and I still disagree with you on the whole the dad was going to kill the kid. I think that the dad was flat out saying, I'm going to kill Franklin. But
he didn't. So in a hindsight 2020 situation, he didn't do that either.
How many times you've been pissed at somebody and says, I'm going to kill him? That's what the dad said. If he does this, I'm going to kill him. He was talking about Franklin. But I can see where you're coming from. I mean, the whole point of watching TV is it's subjective. So sure. I completely see where you're coming from. The other thing, you mentioned Sinclair again. One thing I wanted to, and I swear this is not the Bash Jessi show. you're throwing out points, and I'm just doing counterpoints.
Oh, I'm fine. Listen, what I signed up for. Let's do it.
You mentioned Sinclair made a mistake here. I actually love the fact that Sinclair, who we already know through Parliament of Dreams, is somebody who values all religions. So he's definitely in character here.
Sure.
He goes to Sean and gives Sean agency. He goes to Sean and say, what do you want? What do you want me to do? He goes to the kid. Now, you can argue the kid is not an adult and can't make decisions for himself anyway, and I completely agree with you there.
Right.
But I do appreciate that Sinclair gave him agency.
I thought that was really cool how Sinclair went to go talk to him because he was in a conflict of, what do I do? I've got, Franklin pressuring me to allow it. I've got the parents pressuring me to say no. So the fact that he had the wherewithal to go ask the kid and have like a really meaningful discussion with the little boy, I thought that was really good. And then at the very end, when he had the surgery and Franklin was like, see, you still feel like the same person. And he was like, yeah, I'm still me. And he was like all excited about how he was still who he was. He felt the same. He, still knew the songs. He still knew his whole religion. Like he didn't feel like he lost his soul. And he was so excited to tell his parents that. And then they shunned him. I was just like, man, like that was like so heartbreaking because, he told Sinclair, I want to live, but I don't want to lose my soul. Franklin does it anyway. He's like, yay, I didn't lose my soul. I'm still me. And his parents are like, oh, hell no, demon. We're done with you. And, he's crying and singing the song and Franklin's comforting him. And at the end, when Franklin realizes that they're going to kill him and he goes in there and he's crying, it's kind of like, I feel like he realized that he messed up. You know what I mean? Like, I think at that point, he finally realized I shouldn't have done that. And at the very end, when him and Sinclair were talking and he's like, are you okay? And he's like, no. And, the whole thing they had, the dialogue about, what makes us human is that we care and we never stop trying. And then, the doctor was like, yeah, but there's so many ways that we can hurt. I just felt like it all kind of like came full circle. You can tell he was really remorseful.
Was Franklin really remorseful? I mean, he was remorseful the kid died. I get that.
Yeah,
I don't think Franklin learned anything.
No.
And I'm not speaking about what happens next because we will talk about that beyond the rim. And I don't think Franklin learned anything in this episode. I think at the end of the day, he's upset that the kid died completely. He's just completely beside himself. But I don't think he learned anything. I think if another kid walked on into medbay tomorrow with the exact same problem, he would make the exact same decision. I don't think Franklin learned anything, better or for good or bad. That's my opinion.
I can see that too.
Emily, what do you got?
So, listening to all you guys talk, I was thinking back to the scene where the parents come in and they see him and he's alive and he's feeling better, and their initial reaction is like, "You're a demon." And it really makes me wonder, what would it take to make them question their faith? Like, their belief and culture is so strong. They killed their son because they didn't think it was their son. And like, to look at his face and see him so happy and so alive and just reject him like that. Like, is there anything that could make them question, do we really like this belief system? You know, I mean, to me, their reactions were just felt very extreme. Like, that's your kid, you know, as a parent, you want to protect them. You want to see them happy. You want to see them thrive and like have the best life they can have, whatever that looks like. And I don't know, that was just, it was kind of hard to see them reject him like that. And then what they did, and to think, you know, they never stopped to question what they were doing, it seems like.
I'll throw it back at you, though, and I will say I'm being devil's advocate here because, as I've already said on this podcast in a previous episode, I'm an atheist. I am 100% science, yay, wow. But what would make Franklin question his belief? Because we have two believers here. We have the parents and their beliefs, and we have Franklin and his beliefs. And even Sinclair asks him, what do you believe in? And by the way, he dodged the question. So
yeah, he was
what would
kind
make Franklin
I
question?
have science and data on my side, and I tend to align more with that because, like, you can see someone living there, but after we're dead, we don't know what happened. So I gotta side with what we can actually see and experience as opposed to what may or may not happen.
But isn't it fascinating, though, in this show, we know what happens when people die. We actually know that. We saw it way back in episode 2 or 3. We know that there are, maybe it's not souls, maybe it's something else, but there is absolutely something that winds up in those little balls when the soul hunters come to town. So yes, in our universe, in our reality, we don't know that there is a soul, or yes or no. And honestly, if you ask me, there probably isn't. But in this universe, there is something, and Franklin knows it because he even asks in that episode, "What did you see? What did you see?" So it's just interesting that this comes up in this universe.
Yeah. And like with the soul hunter, it seemed like they were keeping them in a state they shouldn't have been in. It wasn't going through the natural cycle. So I don't know. But yeah, it's just seeing them reject him and then murder him basically was
what this kid really needed was Martin Sheen. And you all will laugh at that joke 3 years from now. Like you're
I'll forget it by then.
This kid really needed Martin Sheen, and he didn't have Martin Sheen with him. Blake?
Correct. So I'll just touch a bit on, Jessi mentioned the medical neglect piece, and even that comes with a lot of religious exemptions and allowances. There's been numerous court cases that have sided with parents and religious belief. We've seen a number of court cases saying that upholding parental rights on that. And we've even seen with the recent pandemic, the number of allowances made to vaccines for religious reasons to avoid getting even the vaccine or any vaccine. I mean, you look at the larger anti-vax movement at this point, who's claiming religious exemptions and other stuff to try to get out of vaccine mandates for any type of vaccine, and leading to resurgence of diseases that we haven't dealt with in years because of these exemptions that are increasing as we go forward.
I just have a quick comment. I don't understand why Franklin didn't make a bigger push to have a much deeper understanding for their cultural beliefs and religion much earlier in the episode. I suppose you could probably argue that team was working on it and it was such a far off world that they couldn't get any information. But so why not ask the parents for more information about their cultural beliefs? I don't understand that. And as a matter of writing, it just seems very plot convenient to, at the very last second,
Yeah, both you and Blake have brought up the plot convenience on that, and obviously it's a written episode, so that is for the plot. But I will defend David Gerrold in this because we're told that at the beginning of the episode, the other doctor is working on research on this. She is doing this, and actually, I think one of the failures of Franklin, and this is actually in the writing, is that he did not involve the parents in the conversation. Instead of involving the parents in the conversation, he went out and started getting the approval to do it anyway. Much like the parents didn't involve themselves in the conversation with Franklin, they went out and started building up their team of people who would be against it. So if these two had talked together, I think that would have gone a long way. But to defend the whole research thing, the kid coded. They thought they had more time, and then they're like, he's going to be gone in an hour. So again, yes, it is plot convenient, but that's the argument for the writing is the kid went faster than they thought he would. So if he had held on a little bit longer, they would have had that research. Jessi, what do you got?
There was a second right before he cut into the kid where I think he even doubted himself. And it was like, ooh, what's going to happen? So if the doctor believes what the parents believed, then why are we here? You know what I mean? Like, why are we doing this? So even me as a viewer, I was like, what's going to happen? Are we going to see this soul leave the body? Because you know what? I know what I believe, but that doesn't mean it's right. And if I know that, you hear other people say what they think and you're like, oh, that's absolutely ridiculous. But is it? Like, is it really that ridiculous? What if they're right and I'm wrong? And I think in my 40 quick 1 years, I definitely have had moments like that where it's like, okay, I know what I've been taught, but what they've been taught, they also believe is right. So where do we find a common ground here? And you could see him battling that right before he cut that child.
Jessi, you said 40. Didn't you mean 25?
41.
Okay. I'm just trying to help you out there. I'm sorry.
29 for the 17th time. Yes.
It's the anniversary of your 29th. Yeah.
Yes.
I mentioned this already. I love that we've seen this twice with Franklin, that even though I swear Franklin does have a God complex and he believes he's right, he's inquisitive. And we saw the same thing again, I already said in Soul Hunters, when he was really intrigued by the whole soul thing. Mm-hmm. He's like, should I cut into this kid? Right. And if you listen, there's a little bit of a whoosh when they cut the chest, which is just, I love that the Foley guys put that in there just for fun. I don't think this episode shows Franklin in a very good light, and I don't think Franklin does very well in this episode. Even though I would have done the exact same thing Franklin did, I don't think this is a good episode for Franklin in terms of his character. I think it's good for the character building, but Franklin makes a lot of poor decisions in this. I do think that kind of shows that he's more than just this on the rails, I'm going to do whatever I want. He's still inquisitive. Nicole, what do you got?
I was just going to say, like how Jessi said he kind of hesitated, and he said a prayer, and the lady was like, oh, wait, what did you say? And he's like, hey, my prayers have got to be just as good as theirs are, but that was kind of interesting.
The interesting thing with this episode for me, and something we haven't hit on yet, is I look at this episode different now as a parent than what I did before I was a parent. I've got 3 kids, and I think I get more an ethereal, gut feeling that I want to punch those parents in the face now that I have kids. So it's harder for me to argue the other point, because I don't care. I don't care if I've read the same book about religion since I was born. If my kids are on the table, you're going to cut them open, because that's what you're going to do. But I also have to look at this as, what if I had the same thoughts and feelings as these parents did? And put yourself in the mindset that you absolutely know that when this happens, your son is going to be gone. And instead of that, you're going to have, we've mentioned demon. They said that in the show. I will actually use with the Babylon First guys, another podcast that's watching the show for the first time as well. They said zombie. So imagine, without a doubt, that when that kid comes out of the operating room, no matter what he says, he's a zombie. Would you approve of that surgery? And I think our answer would be no, because we don't want that. But that's what they believe. Jessi, what do you got?
I just, I had that same thought during watching it, was like, who are we to decide who is right and who is wrong, right? Like, I know that we all are taught something. Some of us believe nothing. Some of us believe this. Some of us believe that. I've always been the one that just kind of takes the stance of like, whether I call him God or you call him Allah or somebody else calls him Bob, like we're praying to a common creator, right? But like, just like I don't want to be told what to do with my body. I think that others are the similar, in the similar arena of not wanting to be told how to handle their religion. So I was, you're watching it and I'm seeing two completely different viewpoints. I relate with a doctor who's sworn to protect this child, and I relate with parents who don't want people, tramping on their beliefs. And it's like, who makes the right decision? This goes back to the very first question of whose decision, whose belief is right. So it's just this absolute shit show. Yes, I said Bob. Okay.
I immediately popped in my head, Rob Williams had a sketch, and may he rest in peace. Rob Williams had a sketch where he's talking about Jim Bob as a god, and he goes, praise to him, Jim Bob, he who gets us stuff and finds me a job, Jim Bob.
Yes.
Sorry, you're having this very philosophical conversation.
It's fine. I don't expect to have any deep conversations with this group. So if we get one, we get one.
Just pluck those cherries out when you can, kids.
Yeah.
Blake, what do you got?
So the reason I brought up earlier some of David Gerrold's other work, like Blood and Fire, if you look at some of the stories he's done, the novels he's done, he did the story The Martian Child, which was made into a movie, which had some significant changes to it, but the basic underlying story of a lot of things that David Gerrold has written are these type of morality issues, or answering questions of life and morality. He's done it in quite a few of his works with similar themes, but also around acceptance and understand between parents and children, or creators and what they create. He did a story with the creator of a sentient AI and deciding whether it should be turned off and things. So this is a common thread amongst his type of writing. So probably no doubt why JMS had him doing the writing on this one, but he's done this a lot and he's done it very well. And I think this is probably the way he did the writing on this, I think was probably in reaction to what he got pushed off on in Star Trek when they refused to let him make the script he had written. And to have the studio affirm this one and say what they did and say, yeah, go for it, do it. I think that was a boost to him and some of what he did for other works.
And I'm glad, Blake, you mentioned why David Gerrold got picked for this one. The premise came in, and JMS shopped it out to the writer's room. And he also picked David because he's his father. He had just adopted a son before this episode was written. And Gerrold came back to JMS afterwards and said, now I understand why you made me write this. Because as a father, and JMS, by the way, is not a father, and there's, again, becoming Superman, there is a very distinct reason why JMS is not a father, and he goes into detail on it. That's why he gave Gerrold this writing assignment, because he needed somebody who has a kid to look at it that way too. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll build upon the point that Jessi made and the point that you just made about being a father, and I'll say this: I think in this episode, titled Believers, the only believers aren't Dr. Franklin and the parents. I think we as viewers are believers as well, because we're going to have a very visceral reaction to what happens in this episode and who we agree with.
I'm snapping, sir. Thumb snaps. Good job.
Yes, thank you. I got way up my own ass on that one. But and to that point, I think, things happening in the world today, right? We've had a lot of these news stories surrounding COVID and other stuff happening. And quite frankly, I'm a parent, and I fully acknowledge that I will look at somebody else's situation and what's happening and what's in the news and who stepped on whose rights, and I'll have an opinion about who I agree with. But that's going to be potentially different if it's their kid and not mine. Because as soon as something comes up that flips that role and now it's my kid, I may turn into the world's biggest hypocrite. And I think that's worth pointing out, because again, I think the characters in the show aren't the only believers here. I think we're all believers when it comes to something that we really believe in, or the hill we're willing to die on, or whether it affects us directly or affects our family directly. I mean, it's an unanswerable question. This is the Kobayashi Maru of Babylon 5, and like, there's no winner. There's no right answer. No one's going to agree. Like, we could talk about it all night.
Okay, we're going to move into predictions and questions. So we're going to go to our newbies and ask them if they have any questions that, not philosophical questions, but other questions that may come up through this episode, and then any predictions they may have after this episode. So we'll go to Nicole first. Questions and predictions.
So I guess my questions would be, are there going to be any repercussions to Franklin for doing what he did? Is there going to be any sort of backlash from maybe the people of the egg or whatever their race was? Is there going to be any future conflicts with Sinclair and Franklin? Is Franklin actually going to resign, even though Sinclair told him he didn't have to? And then I guess a prediction would be is that I don't think this is going to be the last of the debates or conflicts with Franklin and medical care and things like that. I think this might be a little bit of foreshadowing of what's to come.
Okay, Emily, question and prediction.
Will we ever get to see Ivanova's fighter pilot skills? Because, yeah, I want to see that. That's about all I got. Because this episode was a lot, and I don't really feel like getting haters, so.
You can send your hate mail to gray17podcast@gmail.com. Let's go over to Jessi. Question and predictions.
I have none on either side. This episode was exhausting.
It is. Justin, questions, predictions.
I mean, I guess Nicole covered a lot of the questions I have regarding Dr. Franklin. I kind of am interested to see if he has what the blowback against him is. And then, it's, specifically since they mentioned a couple times that the Earth Alliance refused to kind of even acknowledge that the situation was going on and just dumped it all in like Sinclair's lap. If there is going to be any kind of response from the Earth Alliance regarding what actually ended up transpiring. And then another question I have is going back to when we talked about earlier about only 3 officers are qualified to lead a squadron. Are the rest of the pilots just like dumb TIE fighter pilots? Like, what is the whole what is actually defending the station if everything is in the hands of 3 people? And that's kind of one thing I don't understand, and I hope it gets answered a little bit better in the future. And then really predictions based off of this particular episode. I kind of want to see Ivanova do, I guess, a little more. I want to see, more of from this episode carried forward. And I kind of hope to see her more in a leadership combat role. And that is all.
Got it. Andrew, questions and predictions.
Well, both Nicole and Justin covered my questions about Dr. Franklin, but my question about is about Ivanova and same kind of thing. Will there be any repercussions for Ivanova? And I'm predicting though that it'll probably be a little bit more positive because she did break her orders, but at the same time she successfully saved someone's life. So
sometimes things work out, sometimes they don't. I've misquoted Garibaldi about 7 times in this podcast now.
But the one quote that I will throw out there, and it's completely kind of, I don't know, semi off topic, but I thought it was a really good quote from Garibaldi is, "Sure is for people with nothing on the line."
Mm-hmm.
Really like that one.
Our chief Garibaldi hater is not with us this week, but I think this is a really good Garibaldi episode. Even though he's only in for like 4 scenes, I think we get a lot for Garibaldi.
I do and I don't. And I don't know if this is another production order thing, but the one thing I would say is with Garibaldi being the kind of straight shooter everyman, like, I'm almost shocked that he was aware of this situation with the parents and the kids and didn't involve himself at all. Because I feel like the Garibaldi that we've met up until this point would have 100% interjected and like thrown the parents in jail or something. Just seems like something he would have done. It seems like he would have put himself on the line to protect a kid.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about Garibaldi next week, and we'll leave it at that. Okay, so go ahead and end it there for our newbies. What we're going to do now is we're going to send them out an airlock, and then we are going to stick around with Blake, Mike, Kevin, and I, who have watched the entire show, and we're going to answer all these questions, predictions they threw at us. So if you are somebody watching Babylon 5 for the first time, this is where you're going to leave us after the credits. And then if you are somebody who either doesn't care about getting spoiled or has already seen the show, stick around after the credits, and we will talk about that. So until next time, I have been Scott, and with me has been
Emily,
Blake,
Mike,
Nicole,
Andrew,
Jessi.
I'm Justin.
And Kevin.
And somebody snorted. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for listening to Grey 17, a Babylon 5 podcast. You can find all the places to listen to this podcast and links to our social media accounts at anchor.fm/Grey17podcast. We want to hear from you, so please join the discussion on Facebook and Twitter. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Grey 17 is a part of the Front Row Network and NPR Illinois Community Voices. You can find all the Front Row shows at thefrontrownetwork.com. Grey 17 is not affiliated with, and this podcast has not been prepared, approved, or licensed by Warner Brothers or any other owners of the Babylon 5 copyright. All audio clips included in this podcast are the intellectual property of their respective copyright holders. They are included here for the purpose of review, and no infringement is intended. The opening and closing Babylon 5 themes are available from Falling Matter on YouTube.
And what's out there?
The rim,
And beyond that?
the truth.
Okay, welcome back to Beyond the Rim, where we stay with our long-term fans to spoil everything, which honestly, there's not much to spoil in this one. This is a pretty bottle episode, but we're going to do a little bit of talking. So let's go ahead, guys, and talk about Franklin, because I think absolutely that is what's going to continue on. So who wants to talk about how Franklin's affected by this episode, if at all?
I thought it was really interesting that I think it was Nicole said, do you think he's going to resign later on over this? I'm like, well, yes, but not over this.
But I think this is part of it. I absolutely think this is part of it.
Yeah, I
think his God complex is what brings him to that. And Blake, you're nodding, so go for it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You said it during the main session or main part of this. Franklin didn't learn anything out of this. He's sorry the kid died, but he didn't learn anything. And we're going to see this obsessive behavior from Franklin continue throughout the series, up to the point when he finally has that break and goes on his walkabout, gets stabbed and meets himself, basically. You know, we're going to see this almost obsessive. He starts abusing stems. He starts, screaming at other med lab staff for doing things. So I don't think we're going to see any immediate repercussions, but yeah, when he has that break and goes on his little walkabout, I think it all just cascades into that.
And if you're being, if you're giving a lot to the writing here, I think this absolutely is a start of it. I think this really is a bottle episode. I think more reasons of why Franklin will get into something else happens later. But if you want to give a little bit to this episode, I think, if anything, he sees this as a failure in that he didn't do it fast enough. If he had done it fast enough and decided to do this sooner, maybe he could have found another solution. And I think that turns into his continued God complex of needing to be perfect, never sleeping, and doing all of the drugs to make sure of that and everything else. Mike, you have anything else you want to add about Franklin?
No, not really. I think you hit the nail on the head.
The other thing is the question about the parents and the egg. They don't come back at all. This is a one and done, so we will not have repercussions for that. But I don't think we need to. I don't think episode needs to be a lore episode to be good. And I think this episode is definitely one that sticks with you whether you like it or not. Let's go into Ivanova a little bit and the Raiders, because the other question was, is there going to be any kind of pushback for Ivanova? And of course the answer is no.
Well, but too deep there, I was going to touch on the piece with the command staff.
Oh, please go for it.
Because, this was production order 5. They had their main cast, but extras at this point and expanded cast weren't that much. There's a few people in the background that we've seen. I mean, you see Lieutenant Corwin in the background, but I don't think we know who he is at this point. We just see the bit actor there in the background. The other thing we don't see that we'll get, I don't even think it comes in season 1. I don't think we get it till season 2. But you'll see that there is a captain or lieutenant that is kind of in charge of the fighter wing.
Yeah.
And so you'll get and I don't think we get that. Yeah, Kevin, you're saying 2. I don't think we get that.
Oh, yes.
Lieutenant
Keffer, who is, I mentioned in this episode about how the studio makes poor decisions. We will get to Lieutenant Keffer because he was absolutely a studio decision. JMS had no plans for Keffer.
To me at all.
Yeah, and so the studio said, we need a young hotshot pilot a la Top Gun. And so he made Keffer, and JMS flat out said, fine, I'll put him in, but I'm going to kill him before the end of the season.
Well, and he hardly did anything with his character at all during season 2. I mean, he's completely a throwaway.
Because JMS didn't want to write for him.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, it was just a 2-dimensional, crappy character.
I like the actor, honestly. He got like he's got some charisma to him, but yeah, no, he's
Ropus was the only episode he really got to do much of anything other than there's one other one where they're stuck in hyperspace that he does something with, but he basically has 2 episodes a whole season 2.
Yeah, so we will definitely talk about Keffer. I'll be interested to see what the newbies feel about Keffer because I will try to remember not to talk about the fact that studio forced him on him, and I will see what the newbies say about that. It'll be interesting.
But even with the Force, it still does resolve that issue because only having 3 command staff that can lead a fighter squadron is kind of a.
I agree.
At least it does fix that.
Well, and also, I mean, as we know, in the next episode, we're going to get a new fighter wing of Star Furies as well, too. So they are definitely building out the military side of things.
Delta Wing.
Yeah. Well, and Keffer was in charge of Zeta Wing. So there you go.
Yeah, I don't know how you don't have a CAG on the space station. That doesn't make sense.
I think it's actually
the wrong show.
But you know what? It's a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Because, especially in the early 90s like this, Wing Commander is huge right now. On PC. I think we're up to Wing Commander maybe 3 by 94, maybe Wing Commander 4 at this point. I think that would have been something to tap into that wasn't done, is actually see that Star Fury side of things more. But it doesn't really happen. But one thing we do get, because the other question was, do we get to see Ivana in a dogfight? I mean, we don't see Ivana in a Star Fury that much, but we will see her commanding fleets. And I think the newbies are going to love that.
Yeah, I think more generally, it's like I want to see Ivanova do more badass stuff, and yeah, you'll get to.
Nothing at all happened in Sector 8-2 by 9 by whatever.
It's awesome that Jessi's come around on Ivanova. I mean, we all knew she was going to, but I thought it might take a little bit longer because she seemed like she might be digging in her heels. But no, it's happened at a good time.
Well, and Blake and Kevin, you've known Jessi as long, if not longer, than I have. And
she's Ivanova. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's
totally is Ivanova.
So I think I honestly, even though Ivanova didn't get much to do in the first few episodes, I think part of it was Jessi was seeing herself in there. And so that may have pushed her off a little bit. But now she is flat out. She's on Team Ivanova, and I appreciate it.
Well, I think the other part too, and I'll say this in Jessi's defense too on Ivanova, is we had him watch The Gathering. Now, yes. When The Gathering first came out, it was a year between The Gathering and the start of the series proper. We had him do it in a week.
Yes.
So, they got used to the characters in The Gathering, and she was really liking Laurel Takashima.
Mm-hmm.
And then for that, when there was a year between there, okay, you can excuse where characters go. And I think even the setting for the start of season 1 takes place a fair bit after the events of The Gathering.
It's a year.
They built the year into the script. So you can kind of excuse that. Our newbies didn't get that experience. We put them into watch this 1 week later, watch Midnight on the Firing Line.
Yeah, timeline-wise, Babylon 5 has been online for 2 years now because it was the year anniversary for The Gathering, and then it's a year after that. So B5 has been online for 2 years. Which actually was mentioned in another episode because there was Lloyd's of London had odds on how long it was going to last. Anything else spoilerly that we want to talk about with this episode?
I don't know if it counts as spoiler yet. It surprises me that no one else has questioned the nature of Babylon 5, the military aspect of Babylon 5, because especially in the previous episode is the first time we've ever seen that the station itself actually can defend itself. I guess. Like, it does have guns, even though they all act like they're going to poop themselves the first time any ship comes out of hyperspace. And then the fact that it has not just one, but will eventually get multiple fighter wings. But yet we see, I don't want to I'm going to have to liken it to like a Star Trek show about the DS9, but like, I feel like we see very, very few station personnel. There's almost no military presence, right? If there are only 3 people who are qualified to command a fighter wing at this point in time, we see the handful of random security guards that appear whenever there's trouble down below. But really, if you think about DS9, I feel like in every single shot in Works, there are a handful of Starfleet personnel walking around in the background. And in this,
an extra budget.
And in the series, you just don't get that.
That's true. And I'm looking forward to the military aspect of the very next episode. Survivors, we actually, again, as I kind of alluded to, we get a military personnel member who is by the book, which is different than what we have seen before. So, and, Kevin, you mentioned Gropos. I think that's an excellent episode. And that really gets into it as well, too. Garibaldi gets his girlfriend for about 5 seconds. It's great.
I think Babylon 5 does spend money on background extras, but I think they emphasize them different. DS9, you saw a lot of Federation personnel, and you saw the occasional, civilian on the promenade type thing. But Babylon 5, where you see the more civilians, is when you see the scenes in the gardens or the Zocalo area, or even walking through the hallways, they tend to have more of the civilian. I think they're trying to emphasize more it's a city in space more so than the military aspect.
And it does. It totally makes sense because B5 is significantly larger than DS9 was. But also, I think it is the nature of the station being more of a city in space diplomatic endeavor versus something military. But at the same time, it does just feel weird how little that you ever see a uniformed, person walking around doing anything official.
Well, even when you see the Earth Alliance team, when they're not in their duty stations, they're in civilian clothes. So who knows how many of those civilian clothes ones we're seeing are Earth Force personnel.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And I think we will see more of that as we move on too. But it's definitely something that's different between the two shows. I always like watching when you watch DS9 every once in a while, a TNG episode or uniform will show up because they just raided the TNG stage because we need an extra uniform since thrown in there. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and wind it down there, and we will come back to talk spoilers again with Survivors next week. And again, if you are following along with us, please be sure to like and subscribe and review and do all that. But we would really love to hear from you all on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts and YouTube accounts. We have comments going with different people on each one of those, and it's great to have conversations with you all. But if you are one of the folks who have been along for the ride like we have, keep them spoiler free. Don't spoil the newbies. Until next week, I am Scott, and with me has been
Blake,
Kevin,
and Mike.
It's fine. Don't worry about me. I'm just going to sit here and knit something. Maybe a nice sweater, some socks,